Well met, lords and ladies, Jacob Butter speaking, and a warm welcome to this week's Walking Wednesday. I'm just going to get right into it because I don't know how long I'm going to last talking about this topic. And you all know why you're here, because you've seen the title. Then, a couple of days ago, BB on the Butterbunch Twitter released the Polrr Foldrr, which contained a lot of information about a YouTuber by the name of PolrrBear, who some of you might have actually heard of. Some of you might not. If you're just watching from my channel, then the most that you'll probably know is Shorty's ex, and also the person who made that him movie that I was a part of and also reviewed along with Aiden, which then inspired the song It Was All Him, It Was All Him, Everything Is So Very, Very Grim. So yeah, that guy basically. So yeah, from the onlook of things, you'd say pretty decent dude if you're just looking for that perspective. But obviously, if you're coming to see this video, I don't know if you found about it like on Twitter or someone has referred it to you and you're a fan of Polrr's, then he needs no introduction. Rather I do. So yes, I was that guy who did those things. And I am also the Jacob that was mentioned very briefly in the Twitlonger that accompanied that publication. The idea of talking about that today is mainly to state that there's usually a more effective way to actually get people, get the audience of somebody to react to a call out like this one. So what happened was, as soon as I saw that folder being posted, I knew about it for months in advance. I'm going to just declare that right here so no one thinks that I'm completely out of the loop. I don't want to pretend that I'm more in the dark than I actually am. So, but I didn't actually see any of the contents until later. So, curiosity piqued me because I was at the I was aware of a lot of the things that are mentioned in that folder as they were going on. Or rather, I'd say as they were going on, more like right after they happened. Because as people will undoubtedly put together, or they knew already, depends where you come from actually. I almost said as you know there, that was a mistake. That I have been friends with both BB and Shorty for donkey's years now. I think it's coming up on 4 for BB. We originally met on the AFMAL wiki all that time ago. But also, if I'd actually, it may have been like mid 2018, because I'm pretty sure by the time we started talking, season 6 of my show hadn't even come out yet. Yeah. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. As for Shorty, a little while later, it was 2019, but still. So, and that's why amongst, well, I still say amongst other people, but amongst them and Aiden, is why I suggested making a channel with all 4 of them. We were that close as a friend group until the Bear Man came along. And yeah, this is where like the one aspect of possible personal stakes might actually come in, personal bias, in terms of the fact that as soon as BB and then Shorty, who were both fans of Sam Gladiator and thus were inclined to work on Yandere Season 1 on Polrr's channel, the canonical following to that, as soon as they joined Ice Cube Studios, it did sort of form a bit of a communication barrier between them. BB addresses this in the Twitlonger from her perspective when Polrr and Shorty started dating soon after. It was just a much more extreme version in that case. And yeah, I'm not gonna say, oh, you know, that's the reason that I'm suing this out. I'm just giving people the background, so it's like, well, that's all that really, that's the only real personal impact of me, and that's really just what happens. I personally chalk that down to, oh, you know, this is just how things work. It's a much more, Ice Cube Studios is a much more successful company. It's a good opportunity for them, and as far as my measly corner of the internet goes and the scope of Buttercore, it was fractional and remains fractional to this day. I'm not going to pretend that. So, but the reason I bring it up at all, really, because it is just trivial stuff, is because actually it's largely indicative of another trend that apparently Polrr exhibited. I wasn't made aware that the reason that Shorty was more incommunicado, let's say, was because that was actually at Polrr's request. It wasn't just a simple natural case of people drifting off, as I suspected at the time. It was actually also that upon Polrr's request, according to the Twitlonger, that she was not to communicate with other people as much. Which, if that is indeed true, that makes a whole lot of sense in terms of where it falls on the timeline. And is also probably one of the biggest gripes that I, as an individual, would have had with Polrr, if I'd known about it. Because if people watch me, they know that I'm highly critical of anyone of toxic relationships, like anyone in a relationship trying to control the other person's friendship groups, the scope of that. Use out of insecurity, but that's no excuse. In fact, there's actually a character in The Mutant Girl called Darren, who everyone universally hates. And that's deliberate, because he's based on guys who have done that in the past. He's not based on Polrr, because it was written before any of this came to light. In fact, I think it was written before I even met the guy, I think. So yeah, that played no part. But my goodness, is it ironic now that the character that's voiced by Shorty is the one who ended up dating him. Just again, the prophetic nature of the Mutant Girl at times that I really don't like sometimes. I don't, but yeah, that's... So going back to the objectivity of everything, the actual contents. Now I keep saying allegedly and according to the Twitlonger and stuff, because I am trying to just take a step back and look at this as an example of what to do and what not to do in terms of trying to I guess I don't want to say expose someone, call someone out. There we go. That's it. Expose and cancel. They're two words that are just thrown about so much they just lost all meaning. It doesn't. But yeah, if you're attempting to call somebody out, the first thing that I would do is figure out what's best, where best to do that, and that's usually, the answer to that is usually the place they have the most influence. So as soon as I had checked the Polrr folder and looked through a few of the images and stuff, I noticed a few problems right away. And the problems included the fact that the images themselves appeared out of order. That's mainly a file names issue, because some of them are just the default files that will appear differently depending on how they're labeled by the program. That's just how that goes. But it's also, yeah, you can piece them together. You can follow the path. You can say, oh, this message comes after this message. It's mostly Discord captions, but some of them are Twitter posts. You get the idea. And they all relate to a specific theme. Now, the theme separation itself is great. There's stuff that's labeled transphobia, there's stuff that's labeled hypocrisy, there's stuff that's labeled Polrr doesn't need therapy, stuff like that. That Polrr doesn't need therapy thing I'll come back to later, actually. Because it is a deliberately sarcastic title. So that much, the order of them, the folders, the subfolders, I mean, is brilliant. Because if you wanted to find out something in particular, we want to look for a specific issue to address, then that's brilliant. Also because I found this out myself, that BB is indeed telling the truth on this part in the Twitlonger, that Polrr has a tendency to, if someone brings up 2 points in an argument, he'll address the minor one that's easier to debunk and ignore the major one to make himself look better. I've experienced that myself when talking to him. So there is that. So I guess if you wanted to just separate them by categories, that is the perfect way based on the person. But however, the images in the folders themselves are the issue. Because, yeah, it takes a couple of clicks to get to them, that's fine. But if somebody was on the fence or is a fan of Polrr, as plenty of people are, then they're not going to go through the effort of dissecting all of this content. In fact, if BB hadn't muted Twitter immediately after posting the folder, then she would have known that people's replies mostly were just about the fact it was posted in the first place. In fact, it was a breach of privacy. One person even threatened to sue over images with their username in them, which, of course, makes zero sense because it's not illegal to do that. You're posting something on social media. It's hardly, in fact, a lot of these were in a server, so they're hardly private at all. Yeah, it is usually a frowned down thing to do. But yeah, as BB made it very clear in the Twitlonger, she is not remorseful of that whatsoever, nor has she any reason to be, because after someone wrongs so many people, regardless of what state they're in, you need to do something about it. In fact, I myself, a while ago, back in the early days of Buttercorp, actually had issues with quite a number of people, not necessarily going as far as to condone stuff like the R slur and things that have appeared in the folder, but overall just devaluing and insulting people for trying to come forward with their problems while still talking about their own. And I've spoken publicly about this multiple times. In fact, I'm pretty sure it features on an old episode of Walking Wednesday that those people were fired, were removed. And that is something that has not happened to the people in Ice Cubes who were being offensive and hurtful. They were just condoned because either they were in Polrr's inner circle or whatever. And there's evidence of this. I'm not just talking out of my butt, you know. That's part of what was outlined in there. So yeah, that was why it was that was one of the things that there's a constant issue with Polrr. Sometimes it's not just his activity, it's his inactivity. Him being in control of Ice Cube Studios and allowing those things to continue is almost as bad as instigating them himself. Some might say just as bad. And I know that sometimes it's for the sake of the continuity or the timeline and keeping those things together, which I understand why. I don't agree, but I understand. Because that was part of the risk when Mutant Girl Season 1 was yet to conclude, and I had to actually fire one of the voice actors involved for problematic activity, which he has since expressed regret for, but it's still not going to come back to the company. And yeah, the major complaint back then was the fact that I didn't let him finish the performance during the actual season itself. Which, yeah, I could have done, but I didn't want to waste like any more seconds debating whether or not to get rid of this guy. And this guy was also a friend of mine that I'd actually also met the year prior, 2018. Through AFMAL, we'd hung out before, we were friends before the musical even started. But I had to make that decision ultimately because everyone else was being negatively affected by that person's presence. And if anything, it's probably even worse for a company like Ice Cube, because not only do you have to unite with them for voice calls, as was the case back in the day for Buttercorp, but you also have to have people present there for in-moment Minecraft recordings, which can sometimes take quite a long time. Now, from what I've understood, Polrr is actually quite efficient in the way that he carries out that stuff. But still, I have been in recordings that have gone on for hours, waiting for one person or having to set stuff up behind the scenes. Yeah, there's a lot involved there that requires everyone to be on call, interacting and working together. It's kind of like a film studio. It's like being on a film set. And again, I've been on film sets before. They are hectic. So yeah, if one person, is unraveling it, especially if they're in a position of power, you've got to deal with that. Especially if you find yourself in a position above them. So there's that as well. But yes, ultimately, even if you do glean more of that content, even if you do read that stuff, or if you're exposed to it, ultimately the responses that BB didn't see due to the muting of the Twitter were mainly about her seeming pathetic for posting it at the moment, or reviving old drama and stuff like that. I mean, typical fan responses. Those are going to happen either way because people are going to defend Polrr either way, but that's almost exactly why that in isolation doesn't work, because of course the people that are going to see it, aka the people who are on Twitter, who have taken an extra step not only to subscribe to Polrr on YouTube but also to follow him on Twitter for updates, and the associates around, which is probably even a smaller circle than I made it out to be, they're going to be the ones who are probably the hardest to convince of any wrongdoings, or ones who could simply write this off if it's not decipherable. If you give them plausible deniability, they'll just find an excuse, which is ultimately what happened for a lot of people. The excuse of, oh, it being a breach of privacy, a pathetic thing to do, blah blah blah. I of course will say to that, what else could BB have done in that case? Like, having the fault of the evidence is not the issue that I have. It's just the way that it was actually done. And I thought about this because I decided to do this topic, yesterday when Ghosty and I were discussing the aftermath of this. I talked to BB on the day that it happened, and I talked to Ghosty on the day after, and now we're 2 days later, just for clarification. Ghosty's not involved with anything. She was just curious. Happens to follow the Butter Bunch on Twitter, so there's that. And yeah, it was this is when Ghosty pointed out there was a Twitlonger that was attached to this, and we also were saying if the Twitlonger was posted first, then it would have been better. But I realized the Twitlonger was posted first. I back checked it before I started recording this video, and I read the whole thing. And that's where a lot of the context is coming from. I mentioned the Twitlonger a few times, and how I can personally verify some of it from my own testimonies, or from actually hearing about this as it was unfolding. But yeah, before that, I didn't actually realize, because I'm not really good with Twitter in general, so I didn't realize it was posted first. However, neither did most other people. The actual, the Polrr Foldrr tweet, which is a separate one to the Twitlonger one, which is, I'm now realizing would have been better if they were just 2 links put together, maybe. But the Polrr Foldrr one had several pings, including Polrr himself, at the very top, and then several other people who were either in, I guess, what one might consider Polrr's inner circle, or they were mentioned in the actual Twitlonger or folder itself. They were somewhat involved. They probably shared some of the information, which is why a lot of them protested about the use of that information, because they are, again, part of the inner circle. So, of course, that one has 38 replies. The one about the actual Twitlonger doesn't have any. It seems that BB corrected the mistake of not pinging people beforehand so that it could be noticed. Then again, the whole reason that this is being posted now, because she was timing the actual events to come out at some point, was actually just because was just because Polrr found out about it. Somebody actually leaked that information. Excuse me for a second. Okay, here we go. So yeah, someone leaked that information, and it was before it was going to be too late, before Polrr could actually put a spin on anything, like he tends to do, and leave out key details that make himself look bad, which is what happened in the past, as mentioned in the Twitlonger as well. He was at that. So yeah. Not he. Not talking about Polrr. Talking about BB, aren't I? Yeah. So yeah, BB was proactive and actually decided that was the excuse. There was some times when BB didn't want to post the actual folder because she was still involved with the SMP, the Polrr SMP, by the way, and didn't want to then incur the wrath of Polrr and then get kicked out without being able to resolve the plot for a character, and then there was a few other times where it was just like, okay, the next thing, which is why people complain about the old drama, because it's been made for quite some time, and it was only posted recently because of, again, it being discovered, which again I'm of 2 minds about. Because obviously one can argue that the whole breach of privacy thing was still a thing, but at the same time, I acknowledge the importance of releasing that information, because without it, Polrr is just going to continue on the same path that he is right now. There's a whole section that's, well, I mean, I say there's a whole section, there's one image that talks about how he refused to get a therapist. And that was why I was mentioning before, the whole Polrr doesn't need therapy subfolder in the big one. Again, you know, the fact that he refused it, but has been called out several times for this, that was like his anxious behavior and things like that. It's obviously his choice at the end of the day, but at the same time, if he's refusing that step to try and actually improve himself, if that's being shut down and he's just going to continue on the exact same path he is, which is right now damaging other people beyond what I've described here, again, go check out the actual Twitlonger to actually figure it out. It'll be in the description, obviously. I mean, I can't not put it in there. Yeah, so then that's why it needs to be addressed. So on one hand, I understand the timing of it, trying to possibly use some sort of incident to actually boost the interest. But then again, BB shot herself in the foot a second time by limiting this information to Twitter. Back to what I was saying before about actually making the information known on the platform that the person is actually known for, where their info most is. Unfortunately, the audience, the fans, don't know anything about this. again, on one hand, you could possibly say, well, they don't need to know because they're not involved in the circle. But remember, these are the people that really like idolize Polrr, that don't know him personally, and might actually want to get involved in his projects in the future, and therefore might be subject to all these things that are happening. Not unlike BB herself was back in the day. The Twitlonger itself outlines this. She says that she was excited to be a part of Polrr's content. I think it was mainly because of a Sam Gladiator server and the fact that Polrr was there and the fact that it was canonical, things like that. But imagine just replace that interaction with someone finds Polrrr on YouTube, as most people do, and the situation repeats itself. In fact, she actually outlines again that PolrrBear as the persona is still infinitely likable, but Tay the human being, which by the way would be Polrr's first name, as according to his own Twitter, so I'm not doxing him or anything, but Tay the human being is not. And that's really the issue, that the persona seems to be allowed to continue, but it's only on the Twitter spheres where it seems to actually matter, and Discord, which is where all this was done. I guarantee that if she was able to post this stuff on Ice Cube Studios, she would. Which is also partly why I'm making this video, because it needed to be put on somewhere where Polrr's audience could feasibly find it, aka the platform he is most known for, YouTube. I'm not trying to necessarily cancel him. What I'm trying to do more is give the fans the same opportunity that, you know, we Potterheads got when J.K. Rowling revealed her true colours. Just for example. Because that wasn't kept on Twitter. I found that out because of people making YouTube videos about it. Particularly, trans YouTube creators were making videos about it. And quite a lot of them, and some people that actually I followed beforehand and had made Harry Potter content for some time, said that they were done with the franchise. And for good reason. And they might have convinced other people to not do so. It does depend. It's ultimately a case of art versus the artist. If you want to support somebody despite what they've done, go ahead. If you don't, then don't. But you have to be able to access the information in order to draw your own conclusion, which is why it's not fair that it's only on Twitter where this is. Polrr's Twitter following comprises only 7.5% of his entire YouTube audience. So given that, again, 7% who are already more dedicated to him, it's just the actual thing. Even if the Twitlonger itself did come before, it was the Foldrr tweet that got the pings. It was the Foldrr tweet that came up in isolation, people like myself as well. And I knew that the whole thing was being planned. And it's the Foldrr that will ultimately, unfortunately, live in memory of the event. Which ultimately really will negatively affects BB because of the way that people are responding. Because obviously they're going to respond like that. I mean, how could you not? So, what I implore to anyone watching is not necessarily unsubscribe from Polrrr or stuff like that, or not necessarily not support him. You can decide to do that if you want. You don't have to. But what I implore people to do is read the Twitlonger, figure out the impact that he has had on people that I know personally and others that I've never met before. And really get a sense of both Polrrr as a brand and Tay as a person. And go from there. That's essentially it. As for me personally, I am done. I have been done with Polrrr for quite some time. I don't think that's a secret by this point. I was going to try and stay relatively neutral in my analysis, but obviously I have a stance. I have people who I trust infinitely more than the person who's been proven to be untrustworthy time and time again. And even before this stuff came out, I was aware of a lot of it happening. So yes, I haven't outright stated that before, but I've been done with Polrr for some time for that reason. I don't need any more Darrens in my life, that's for sure. And neither do the people who are actually negatively affected by this, especially one of my closest friends who we happen to be dating for quite some time, another of my closest friends who brought this to light in the first place. So, yeah, again, you can consider me a biased viewpoint or not. Again, up to you. I'm just laying things out there on the platform that it should have been on in the first place, so everyone can draw their own conclusions. And as for the elephant in the room about breach of privacy and taking the stuff public that shouldn't necessarily be public, according to some people, I personally think it should have been. It should have been public a long time ago. Just because, again, this is someone who actually has influence over people, who actually is driving a fan base and is consistently growing as a result of it, and who is being idolized by so many people who are going to be put in the circle, who are going to be actually possibly negatively affected unless he actually gets help and decides to legitimately change for the better, not just make empty promises like he's done before, but actually make a conscious effort to go forward and not repeat the same mistakes. There's so much more that I could talk about, but I'm running out of space on my camera to record, and I've made my case. Read the Twitlonger, peruse the folder if you really want to like go through all of the evidence that is essentially out of order. If you want to go through and find out the order, it's not too difficult. I made it out to be a worse detail, but again, go in with an open mind and see for yourselves. And of course, before any of that, please leave a like or dislike. Actually, you know what? Don't do that this time. That's my normal outro. You know, don't leave a like or dislike on this video or whatever unless you really want to. I'm not going to ask anyone, because, you know, that makes it seem like I'm trying to do this for some sort of approval or anything. I'm really not. So, yeah, that's it. You know, don't read the Twitlonger, and that's it. All right, and on that note, until next time. Sorry, I got to take off my glove. Farewell.